Hi everyone! I'm Mia. I'm a comic artist and zine maker based in Melbourne. Today, I'm here to talk about graphic storytelling, otherwise known as comics! Okay, so comics is a very broad medium with an endless number of approaches to the form. This can make the process of making comics extremely intimidating. In order to make it easier to approach and get started, let's break the medium down into its basic formal qualities. At its core, a comic is always a sequence of images that may or may not have text. That sequential quality is what distinguishes comics from illustration. There has to be some kind of tension or progression between the images. Most commonly, this progression is of time, but it can also be a progression of ideas or a visual style. All comics ultimately work via the relationship that these images have to one another or to the text. Let's get even more specific. When I start making a comic, I break the form down into three basic qualities: writing, paneling, and visual style. Writing is your script. It includes dialogue, narration, and diegetic text such as signage or letters. It's effective for conveying information and ideas which aren't easy to express visually, such as a character's thoughts and desires, a description of a feeling, or a fact which you may want to convey to your reader directly. Paneling refers to the arrangement of images in your comic. Paneling dictates the relationship that your images will form to one another and to the page. It impacts the pace and flow of the reading experience, and it's the most direct expression of time available in the form. And lastly, visual style refers to how you actually draw your comics. This will serve to create the tone, atmosphere, and visual identity of your comic, as well as locate it within a visual canon that your reader will then subconsciously refer to, even if they're not someone who actively reads comics. This is pretty important to consider. Pretty much everybody has some varying degree of visual literacy, and what your comic looks like will influence the meaning that readers take. Let's talk through each of these with some examples. This is one of my unfinished comics. It's a sequel to everybody's favorite 90s sitcom. Because I wanted it to have the feeling of a sitcom, I approached the writing exactly like you would a screenplay. The writing in this comic is driven entirely by the dialogue. I thought about dialogue in terms of conflict and negotiation. Each character here wants something different. Rosie, the protagonist, wants to form a new kind of relationship with her ex-wife, one that might make her feel somehow validated, vindicated, or completed. She's fishing for opportunities to talk about herself in a way that might make that happen. Meanwhile, Carol is asking Rosie questions because she wants to be in a comparative position of power and experience. They're both kind of self-absorbed, and their different desires lead to the central conflict of the story. After I wrote the script, I broke every page into a 9-panel grid. This means that each panel represents a shot being sustained for a roughly even length of time, with combined panels representing a sustained shot and reserved for more important beats. The rigidness of paneling mimics the flow of time when you are watching a filmed show, and it helped me to have such a strict structure around which to organize the real focal point, which is of course the dialogue. Lastly, because the central idea of the story is bodies changing, both as a result of medical treatment and also getting older, I developed a visual style which aimed for simplicity, while still allowing for naturalistic and expressive faces and gestures. So with this example, we can see how these three formal principles can be considered and applied in your creative process. A piece of advice is to allow for improvisation when going from script to page. In a similar way to filmmaking, if you think about the characters you're drawing as actors, you can often find opportunities to make changes to the writing when you realize that a particular change might work differently and better on the page. Let's take a look at another example. This comic is an excerpt from a graphic novel I'm currently working on. It's an extended dream sequence where the laws of time get pushed and pulled. In terms of the writing, I wanted to play with smudging that distinction between narration and dialogue. Lines which initially read as internal monologue may suddenly become dialogue and vice versa. You can play with the reader's expectations like this while keeping the comic legible through use of the visual elements. But the paneling is where I really started to explore the elasticity of time in comics. See, there's something that occurs in the space between two images. This space is called the gutter, and it's in this space that the reader's brain creates the illusion of time. How you panel your comic, in other words, how you arrange your images on the page, affects how your images relate to one another. It's not a hard and fast rule, but generally, the bigger an image is and the fewer images are on the page, the more time it takes up in the reader's mind. A page like this has a totally different temporal quality compared to a page like this. You also have the option of disrupting the flow of reading. Generally, a page will read most naturally when there's a clear logic between the panels, moving from left to right, then top to bottom. However, in a page like this, you can add a sense of confusion or floatiness due to the absence of clear delineations between images and the sequence in which they should be read. Pages can be languid, ponderous, frantic, bombastic, and so on. But you can also extend a certain moment by devoting more panels to it. The style as well shifts along the scale of abstraction and realism, depending on the atmosphere that I wanted each panel to convey. Paneling is actually really fun because it's all about visual problem solving. Okay, fine, we'll do one more. This is a philosophical comic essay, engaging with writers like Sarah Ahmed and Judith Butler. It's an exploration of the phenomenology of having a queer body. Because this comic is not being driven by dialogue, but rather my own narratorial voice, I had the opportunity to be a lot more formally playful than in the previous examples, particularly with how I chose to use visual style to express certain ideas. The stylization shifts dramatically, pulling from a wide range of visual elements. The idea here was to get at the feeling of camp, playful performativity that is endemic to moving through the world with a transgender body, to visually express the strongly felt, yet contradictory experiences of living a queer life. A huge advantage that comics have is that they allow for a density of text and voice which isn't possible in other media. There are so many visual shorthands you can use to differentiate between simultaneous textual threads. In these pages, I am able to shift between narration, dialogue, quotation, and footnote at will, differentiated using speech bubbles, insert panels, text placement, and font choices. Basically, you can keep a lot of balls in the air. And that's all I have for you today. Just to recap, writing, paneling, visual style. Thank you for watching, and enjoy your Emerging Writers Festival. Don't forget to like and subscribe!